So if you recall in the last episode, we went ahead and started talking about patterns of colonization. We began with talking about Spain and how they started to more tightly control the Spanish New World. In this episode, we're going to end off talking about how European nations began colonizing in the Americas starting in the year 1607 by entering France and England onto the scene. So let's dive right in. This is APUSHLESS, the show where I attempt to teach you all of the astounding curriculum that College Board provides for the APUSH exam and attempt to create it in a fun and fascinating way for non-APUSH takers to enjoy. That's right, there's no homework, textbook readings, writing tests, primary source documents, no effort required whatsoever. Just sit back and learn the history of the United States. Trust me, it'll help you be a better citizen. As always, I'm your fellow student and host, Trevor Bushnell. Okay, so let's begin by talking about France and their New World Empire. So, New France, the land that New France encompasses around the Lawrence River, which contains Quebec, and encompassed the Great Lakes and the Ohio River Valley, and it did include the Great Basin area. Started with the Port Royal in 1605, which then became Nova Scotia, and then Quebec in 1608 was then discovered by Samuel de Champlain. To clarify, since that was very disjointed, those two places that I showed you, Port Royal and Quebec, those were the first permanent French settlements. Want to make that clear. Port Royal eventually became Nova Scotia, and Quebec was then founded by Samuel de Champlain. It was poorly worded when I originally did this in the show. I don't know what made me think of saying that, because I don't even understand what that was later. So I wanted to clarify so that you guys understood. Port Royal and Quebec, those were the first permanent French settlements around the 1600s. In 1642, the French traders established a small settlement called Montreal, and the French never ended up settling in New Orleans with the Great Lakes, until later in the 17th century. Moving on to discuss the French-American Indian diplomacy, the French relied on relationships with the Indians because they had, because of no settled really colonists in the area, so they really needed help from the natives because there wasn't a lot of population there to aid themselves. The French military learned the native languages, and they all became well-versed in the Indian protocol. So they did things like smoking lawn-stand camkalunets, it's known as peace pipes, we'll just call them peace pipes, and giving and receiving gifts such as wampum belts. Don't even know what those are, but I mean, sounds very native in sounding. So, yeah, what you need to understand there is that they're exchanging Native American gifts to win their trust. French officers even married Indian wives, meaning that the French had pretty good relationships with the natives in that regard. The natives maintained actual control of North America. French had to adjust a little bit in order to gain a strong presence there because of that. And Osage accepted some French agents into their communities. Relationships with the Indians, were not present in the British colonies. So what they're trying to get here is that the French had a better relationship with Britain because the Great Britain colonies didn't really establish a strong presence, as you can see there. So here's an interesting fact about the French New World culture. Since French women were so spread apart in the French colonies, it allowed for an intermingling of peoples and lifestyles. So like the Detroit area combined the French and American Indian elements. Its layout resembled a French village. However, buildings then converted into bark, like the actual building structure was bark-like, similar to American Indian buildings. The clothing had a mixture of both like European and native elements. So, for example, you might have a European shirt, but maybe you have Indian shoes on. The children of intermarried people were called métis. I don't speak French. I think it said métis. or whatever, but it's M-E-T-I-S, Metis, however you say that. But it's French for mixed. So the native women served as cultural mediators, and they were also brokers in the fur trade, and the Metis communities combined Catholicism with ingenious religious practices that combined with the African-American... Where did that come in? That is extremely embarrassing. I meant Native American, not African American. Don't know where that came from. I'm so sorry. The Metis communities combined Catholicism with the Native American religious practices. That's what I meant to get at. So after that embarrassing run, let's just go ahead and talk about the Dutch presence in the Americas. So the first Dutch colonies were essentially functioned more like trading outposts than as populated settlements. But then they established forts and small settlements in Guyana, I think is how you say it, Guyana, in 1590. They took over a string of the Caribbean islands in the early 1600s, and the Dutch colonization efforts were often stopped by European powers, unfortunately. The Tobago attempted settlements, Tobago, my apologies. The Tobago attempted settlements 4 times, and each was burned down by either the France, the Spanish, or the British. So, I mean, they just didn't like the Dutch just being there at all. They were quite attacked. The Dutch obtained the Suriname colony in South America in the 17th century. The British established there in 1650. However, even though the British attempted to establish in the Suriname colony in 1650, Dutch exploration in 1667 allowed it to be captured. It enabled it to capture the colony from Great Britain as part of the Treaty of Breda post the Anglo-Dutch War. The treaty let the Dutch relinquish control of New Amsterdam, and the Dutch focused on sugar production, and they also, just like most of the other colonies in some way, shape, or form, relied on slavery. But they relied on slavery in the form of African slaves. So let's talk about Dutch New Amsterdam. In the 1600s, an expedition led by Henry Hudson, was founded by the Dutch East India Company. And the idea was that Hudson must search for a northwest passage to Asia. And kind of the way he went about doing this, he sailed through the Hudson River, which eventually would take his name. I mean, that's kind of the whole idea why it was named the Hudson River, is because of Henry Hudson. He sailed the Hudson River to Manhattan Island, to present-day New York City, to present-day Albany. However, he never found the Northwest Passage, but the Dutch did want to exploit the area that he discovered because of all the furs, timber, and fertile lands that were in the area. And after several more exploration attempts, the company gave a charter to develop colonies in North America. So the Dutch claimed land from the Delaware River to Cape Cod. And in 1650, a treaty redid Connecticut's borders, allowing the Dutch to access new land. New Amsterdam was the most important colony because it had an administrative seat. In 1624, a settlement was established in Grover's Island, present-day Grover's Island, which is around the New York Harbor area. In 1625, a fort was built on Manhattan, and settlement occurred around this Fort Amsterdam. And in 1626, Peter Minuit, I believe that's how we say his name. I'm very bad at pronunciation, so if you haven't figured that out yet, you're gonna have to bear with me. I also wouldn't mind if you guys want to tell me how to pronounce some of these words. That actually would aid me. Peter Minuit purchased Manhattan from the natives with goods that had an estimated value of $24. While everything of this situation is extremely in doubt, the $24 deal myth lives on today. Look, the economy of New Amsterdam. While they had no immediate profits, the colony floundered during its first 20 years. The Dutch East India Company tried to bring in immigrants by giving lots of land along the Hudson River. Many Europeans of diverse national and religious backgrounds, such as the Portuguese Jews, the Portuguese Jews heading to Brazil, began to come for this reason. They brought slaves to New Amsterdam, specifically African slaves, and the colony thrived under Peter Stuyvesant. again, that's Russian. The Russian is not my first language. Who was a hired leader, who was hired as a leader, at 1647. New Amsterdam became the center of trade for beaver furs, and created a growing commercial town. And King Charles II sent fleets of warships to New Amsterdam, in an attempt to take over that land, and Stuyvesant surrendered in 1664, giving the land to Charles II, who gave it to the Duke of York, who named the land New York. Then again, this creation of some of the middle colonies. As we know, eventually New York got split up and became New Jersey and all that stuff, but we'll get to that a little bit later. And the English formally took the Dutch land in 1667 as a result of the Second Anglo-Dutch War. So now, guys, the moment you've all been waiting for. American history! Because it's not like this podcast was created for that anyway. No, we're actually going to start taking a look at some American history, even though America isn't really made yet. We're going to start taking a look at some of that. We're going to begin with the founding of Jamestown and the starving time. So the first settlers in Jamestown settled in 1607, and England formed a joint stock company to fund this expedition. Jamestown was nearly collapsed because colonists were not prepared to establish a colony or grow crops or even sustain themselves in any way, shape, or form. And the earliest settlers wanted to find gold and silver similar to the Spanish success down in New Spain. So they kind of wanted to be similar to New Spain in that regard. And because they didn't find any metals, they weren't necessarily successful in planting crops because they weren't really focused on that. They were focused on getting the metals and that kind of thing. But they didn't find metals and they weren't successful in planting crops. And by 1608, the winter of 1608, there were 38 of the 144 original colonists still alive. Most of them died off. By 1610, 60 of the 500 colonists that came over were still alive, and many died during the starving time, which was the winter of 1609 to 1610. There's a little bit of information I want you to understand, and that is, let's take a look at geography versus society. So the starving time shows how geography and biology can't always determine the outcomes of human events. Now, you would expect that the Puritans in cold New England to die while the people in Jamestown would thrive because, Jamestown had better climate than that of the northern colonies. However, the opposite occurred, showing that planning and organization trumps geography and biology. I made sure that that entire phrase that I said there was in the show notes because that is a key point that I do not want you to miss. It is a really key idea that will help you understand that topic a little bit better. So make sure that you check out the show notes if you look that over, if you keep that for your APUSH help. Jamestown and the American Indians, those relations with the natives quickly deteriorated with Jamestown. The Algonquin people traded corn with settlers at first, but when the natives couldn't supply enough corn for their English neighbors, the English initiated raids on the Algonquin peoples, and the Indians initiated an assault on Jamestown in 1622. They didn't bring down Jamestown, but they did worsen relations with the natives. An instance with Jamestown foretold history of relations with the natives. Americans would then continue to encroach native lands and defeat natives in violent encounters to take their land. And that is a colonization and the methods of colonization that each of the different European powers used in the Americas. Support for APUSHLESS comes from Google Sites. As you can tell by this side project podcast of mine, I like taking on new projects because they keep me busy and entertained, especially when a certain class named APUSH kind of starts ruling your life. And this is more of a hobby for me, so I need an easy and effective way for me to get my ideas out to the world free of charge. Now, this is where Google Sites comes into play. Google Sites is a website creator like Weebly and Squarespace that is totally free of cost, outplaying Squarespace in that regard. And aside from purchasing a domain, there is no upgrade cost to get everything Google Sites has to offer, making it better than Weebly. Their easy-to-use interface is so simple that even someone who has never had any experience coding at all can create a stunning website with Google's platform. You can even edit your website on your smart device for updating on the go. And now my listeners can also check out my website. Go to sites.google.com/site/APUSHLESS to get episodes, show notes, and resources. And go to sites.google.com to begin creating your own website free of charge. Support for APUSHLESS is brought to you by SoundCloud. SoundCloud is the best way to find all the music you like for free. You can search for certain artists you like, or if you're just interested in listening to a certain track, like Super Mario Bros. Theme or Bass and Firm title song, you can search for just that too. On top of that, if you enjoy creating music as a hobby, you can create a SoundCloud account and upload all music that you create for others to listen to. You can also design the space where people listen to your tracks by changing your profile picture, giving a short sense about what you do, or giving a web link where people can find out more about you. And now my listeners can get episodes of this show off of SoundCloud. Go to www.soundcloud.com/APUSHLESS. And don't forget to go to www.soundcloud.com to begin searching for music and uploading your music free of charge. APUSHLESS is a proud supporter of the FHS Eagle Eye. This online newspaper is the best student-run newspaper that you will find, ever. Our team of editors, writers, podcasters, bloggers, comic makers work so well together to create the best experience you can have while browsing our online newspaper. While some of the articles on the site are school-related, some of them are comics that anyone could relate to. Plus, the newspaper even has their own YouTube channel, FHS TV, where they put up any newscasts that they make. But the best thing that you can find on the newspaper and YouTube channel is a show called The Good, the Plaid, and the Ugly. It is the best talk show created by students that you will ever see. Ever. Maybe the hosts of the show are just too funny, or maybe I'm too good at video editing, or maybe it's a combination of both. But from teaching the history of Eagle's Eyes to discussing 81 blog topics that matter, you never know what to expect with this show, other than it's gonna be hilarious. So make sure that you go over and check that out. The website is www.fhseagleeye.net. Go ahead and check that out. Remember to type in the YouTube search bar for FHS TV, subscribe, turn notifications on, and yeah, it's a really cool newspaper that you should really look into. For producing the APUSHLESS show this week, you have your host here, Trevor Bushnell, and the music happens to come from Nintendo's cleverly created Super Smash Bros. 4 official soundtrack. You may not like video games, but you do have to say that some of these tracks that they put together are pretty sweet. Like, who does not want to listen to a song sung in Japanese? Right? Yeah. To find the show notes for this episode, as well as any other amazing resources to help you be a better citizen by learning the history of the United States, make sure you head on over to sites.google.com/site/APUSHLESS. That is all lowercase. You can find all the episodes of APUSHLESS on SoundCloud with the newest episodes on top and the oldest episodes on the bottom. Make sure you go ahead and check us out. Follow us on SoundCloud. Again, the link is www.soundcloud.com/APUSHLESS. If you'd like to contact us for any reason or to leave an amazing review, email us at feedback.apushless@gmail.com. If you're also interested in looking for a review, I'm trying to see if I can pull this off, but maybe start putting this show up on Apple Podcasts, so leaving me a good review there will increase the number of people who listen to it. We're a group of history nerds based out of the small Pacific Northwest town of Ferndale, Washington, which is north of Bellingham, Washington, if you happen to know where that is. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.